My name is Elena Marchetti, and 3 hours before my husband's funeral, his mother called to tell me not to come. "You've taken enough from this family," she said. Her voice was flat, rehearsed, like she'd been practicing the line in the mirror. "Let us bury our son in peace." I held the phone against my ear and said nothing. Daniel had been dead for 4 days. 4 days since the pancreatic cancer took him at 34. 4 days since I'd slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. 4 days since his family, the prestigious, old money Whitmore family of Charleston, South Carolina, had started referring to me as the situation. I didn't argue with his mother. I just said, "I'll be there, Margaret." Then I hung up, opened my closet, and pulled out the black dress Daniel had once said made me look like a mysterious widow in a European film. He'd said it as a joke, back when we were both certain he'd beat it. Back when the chemo was working. Back before everything fell apart. At the funeral, Margaret Whitmore stood at the church entrance in a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car. Her silver hair was sprayed into immobility. Her son, Daniel's older brother, Prescott Whitmore III, stood beside her with his arms crossed, a human gait. "Elena," Prescott said, stepping forward, "this is for family." "I am his family," I said. "I'm his wife." Margaret's mouth tightened into a line so thin it nearly disappeared. "You were a chapter," she said quietly. "An unfortunate one. Today is about Daniel's real life, his real family. Please don't make a scene." I didn't make a scene. I walked past them, down the side aisle, and sat in the back row next to an elderly woman I didn't recognize. She smelled like lavender and looked at me with kind, watery eyes. "You must be Elena," she whispered. I nodded, unable to speak. "Daniel talked about you every Sunday," she said. "I'm his great-aunt Lydia, the one they don't invite to Christmas." Margaret glared at us from the front of the church, but said nothing. The service began. I watched my husband's mahogany casket, covered in white roses, and felt a grief so heavy I thought my ribs might crack. But what I didn't know, what none of the Whitmores knew, was that Daniel had been preparing for this day for 3 years. And somewhere in a lawyer's office downtown, there was a second will that would burn their entire world to the ground. Before I tell you what happened next, please hit like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. Now, let me take you back to how it all started, to a broken vending machine and a man who changed everything. I met Daniel Whitmore on a Tuesday afternoon in October, 7 years ago. I was 26, working as a barista at a hospital coffee shop in downtown Charleston. Not a glamorous job. Not the kind of job that impresses people with last names that appear on historic district plaques. But it paid my rent and let me take night classes toward my nursing degree, 1 semester at a time. Daniel walked up to the vending machine outside the coffee shop at 3:15 p.m. He was wearing a rumpled blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up, and he looked exhausted. The kind of exhausted that comes from sleeping in a hospital waiting room chair. He fed a dollar bill into the machine. It rejected it. He fed it again. Rejected. He slapped the side of the machine with his palm, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Those machines have been broken since 2014, I said, leaning against the coffee shop doorway. "The secret is you have to fold the dollar into a tiny square and insert it at exactly a 45-degree angle." He turned and looked at me. Brown eyes, dark circles underneath. But when he smiled, the exhaustion seemed to lift for just a moment. "A 45-degree angle," he repeated. "Very specific." "My dad was a vending machine repairman," I said. "I come by this knowledge honestly." He laughed. It was a good laugh. Surprised, genuine, slightly crooked. "Can I buy you a coffee?" he asked, "since you've just saved me from committing an act of violence against hospital property." We sat in the coffee shop for 2 hours. He told me his father, Prescott Whitmore Jr., was in the cardiac unit recovering from bypass surgery. I told him my mother had died of breast cancer 3 years earlier, and that I'd been working at the hospital ever since because being around sick people made me feel closer to her, like I understood something most people didn't. "That's the most honest thing anyone said to me all week," he said. "What does your family say?" He stirred his coffee, watching the swirl of cream. "My family says things like, the portfolio is stable, and the Charleston property needs reassessment. Nobody said they're scared. Nobody said they miss her." "Your mom?"
She died when I was 12. The current Mrs. Whitmore is my father's second wife. He said it without bitterness, just fact. Margaret has been managing the household for 20 years. She's very good at it. She manages people the same way. I didn't know then that he was describing the woman who would one day try to erase me from his life. I just knew I liked him. I liked the way he asked questions and actually listened to the answers. I liked that he didn't flinch when I told him I grew up in a trailer park in Somerville. I liked that he came back the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, always with a dollar bill folded into a tiny square. 6 months later, on a dock at Folly Beach at sunset, he got down on one knee. "I don't have a ring yet because I was too nervous to pick one without you," he said. "But I have a question, and I have a plan." "A plan?" "I want to marry you, Elena. But I also want to make sure that if anything ever happens to me, my family can never hurt you. They're complicated, and I need you to understand what you're signing up for." I said yes, and then I spent the next year learning exactly what complicated meant. The Whitmore family lived in a historic mansion on Laguerre Street, 3 stories of federal-style brick with a wrought iron gate and a garden that appeared in Southern Living magazine twice. Prescott Whitmore Jr. had built his fortune in commercial real estate, office parks, shopping centers, parking structures. By the time I met him, he was semi-retired, spending most of his days in a leather armchair reading the Wall Street Journal and communicating with his children through his wife. Margaret Whitmore was the gatekeeper. Everything went through her. Family dinners, holiday invitations, access to Prescott Sr. She controlled the calendar, the guest lists, the seating arrangements. She decided who was in and who was out. At our first formal dinner, held in a dining room with a table long enough to land a small plane on, Margaret seated me at the far end, next to the kitchen door. "So," she said, unfolding her napkin with surgical precision, "Daniel tells us you're studying nursing." "Yes, ma'am. I have 1 more semester." "How practical." She said it the way someone might say, "How unfortunate." "And your family? What do they do?"
My father passed away when I was 19. My mother a few years before that. I've been on my own for a while. "I see." She took a sip of wine. "And what did your father do, exactly?" "He repaired vending machines." The table went quiet. Prescott III, who everyone called Trey, let out a short, sharp laugh. "Vending machines? Well, that's a first for the Whitmore dining room." Daniel's hand found mine under the table. His grip was firm. "Elena's graduating top of her class," Daniel said evenly. "She's going to be an incredible nurse. And she's the kindest person I've ever met, which is more than I can say for some people at this table." Margaret's smile didn't waver, but something behind her eyes went cold. In that moment, I understood something fundamental about the Whitmores. They didn't see people. They saw resumes, bank accounts, family trees, and I had none of the things they valued. After dinner, Trey cornered Daniel in the hallway. I was in the powder room and could hear them through the wall. "Dad's not going to approve this," Trey said. "She's a barista, Daniel. A barista with a dead vending machine repairman for a father. You're a Whitmore. Act like one." Dad married Margaret 6 months after Mom died, and she was a receptionist at his office. Spare me the class lecture. That's different. Margaret understood what this family required. She adapted. Your little coffee shop girl is never going to fit in, and you know it. Then I guess I'll have to build a life where fitting in doesn't matter. I stood in that powder room, staring at my reflection in a gold-framed mirror, and realized Daniel was fighting a war I hadn't even known existed, and he was fighting it for me. We got married at the courthouse on a Friday morning in April. No Whitmores in attendance, just 2 friends from my nursing program and Daniel's great-aunt Lydia, who brought a bouquet of gardenias from her own garden and cried through the entire ceremony. I've never seen him this happy, Lydia whispered to me afterward, clutching my hands in her papery ones. His mother, his real mother, God rest her, would have loved you. Margaret didn't acknowledge the marriage for 6 weeks. Then an envelope arrived at our small apartment, addressed to Mrs. Daniel Whitmore. Inside was a single-page letter from the family attorney, requesting that I sign a post-nuptial agreement. It's standard, Daniel said, scanning the document. They want to make sure you can't touch the family money if we divorce. Daniel, I don't want their money. I never have. I know. He tossed the letter onto the coffee table. But they don't know that, and they never will, because they don't understand wanting something that isn't measured in dollars. I signed the postnup. I didn't care. But what I didn't know, what no one knew, was that Daniel had already started building a separate future, one his family couldn't touch. 3 years into our marriage, Daniel started losing weight. At first, it was subtle. His belt needed a new notch. His face looked sharper, more angular. He joked that marriage had made him lean and handsome. I laughed, but something in my gut, the nurse's instinct, didn't. Then came the stomach pain, the loss of appetite, the jaundice. I made him see a doctor, then a specialist, then another specialist. The diagnosis came on a Wednesday afternoon in January. Pancreatic cancer. Stage 3. Aggressive. We sat in the oncologist's office, holding hands, staring at a diagram of a pancreas like it was a roadmap to a country we'd never wanted to visit. The doctor said words like chemotherapy and clinical trial, and we'll fight this together. Daniel nodded, asked questions, took notes. He was calm, in the way that people who've already decided something are calm. On the drive home, he pulled into a parking lot overlooking the Ashley River. The sun was setting, turning the water orange and pink and gold. He turned off the engine and sat in silence for a long moment. "Elena," he said finally, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." "I'm listening." "When I die, Daniel, when I die," he repeated, gentle but firm, "my family is going to come for you. They're going to try to take everything. The house, the savings. They're going to say you were never really a Whitmore, that you're entitled to nothing. They'll use the postnup, they'll use lawyers, they'll use whatever they can." Tears were streaming down my face. "I don't care about the money. I just want you to live." He reached over and wiped my cheek with his thumb. "I know you don't care about the money. That's exactly why I'm going to protect you from them. I've been working on something for the past year, ever since I started feeling sick. There's a second will. It's with a lawyer they don't know, and there's a safety deposit box at a bank they've never heard of. When the time comes, everything will go to you. Not the Whitmore fortune. I can't touch that. It's tied up in trusts and family holdings. But everything I built on my own. Everything that was mine." "What did you build?" He smiled, that crooked, surprised smile I'd fallen in love with at the vending machine. "You'll find out, but promise me something. Anything. Promise me you won't let them win. When they come for you, and they will, you stand your ground. You go to the lawyer. You open the box. And you remember that I loved you enough to plan for exactly this." "I promise," I whispered. We sat in that parking lot until the sun went down and the stars came out. 6 months later, Daniel was gone.
The funeral was on a Saturday morning at St. Michael's Church, the historic white-steepled church at the corner of Broad and Meeting that had hosted Whitmore weddings, baptisms, and funerals for 6 generations. After the service, after I'd sat in the back row next to Aunt Lydia, after Margaret had delivered a eulogy that mentioned Daniel's misguided marriage in passing, after Trey had glared at me from the family pew with undisguised contempt, the family gathered at the Whitmore mansion for what they called the reading of the will. I was not invited. Aunt Lydia called me that evening. Her voice was shaking with anger. "Elena, they're claiming the will leaves everything to the family. The house you and Daniel shared, his investment accounts, even his car. They're saying because of the post-nuptial agreement, you have no claim to anything." "Who's the executor?" "Prescott Trey Whitmore III. She said his full name like a curse. "He appointed himself. He's already changed the locks on your house, Elena. He showed up with a sheriff's deputy and a copy of the will and said you have 48 hours to vacate the premises." I sat on the edge of my bed. Our bed. In the house I'd shared with Daniel for 5 years, and I felt the walls closing in. They weren't just trying to take his money. They were trying to erase me, to make it like I'd never existed. But Daniel had told me what to do. I opened my nightstand drawer and pulled out a business card. Embossed lettering. A name. Julian Cross, attorney at law. An address on King Street. And a handwritten note on the back in Daniel's handwriting. Call him. Trust him. D. The next morning, I called Julian Cross. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, his voice warm but professional. "I've been expecting your call. Daniel told me you'd be reaching out. Can you come to my office this afternoon? There are some things you need to see." Julian Cross was not what I expected. He was young, maybe mid-30s, with close-cropped hair, dark-framed glasses, and an office that looked more like a tech startup than a law firm. Exposed brick, standing desks, a coffee machine that cost more than my first semester of nursing school. "Daniel was my college roommate," Julian explained, pouring me a cup of coffee. "We stayed close. When he got sick, he asked me to handle something for him. Off the books, away from the family attorneys. I think you should sit down." I sat. Julian opened a folder and slid a document across the desk. This is Daniel's second will. It was executed 6 months before his death, with witnesses, notarized, the whole thing. It supersedes any will the family might produce. But the postnup doesn't apply to assets Daniel acquired independently after the marriage. And Elena? Julian paused, choosing his words carefully. Daniel had been quietly building something for years. He invested in startups, real estate, a medical device patent. He kept it all separate from the family money. He used a trust, the same kind of trust his grandparents should have used to protect him from people like Margaret and Trey. I stared at the document, the words blurred. How much? Julian slid another paper across the desk, a summary of assets. At the bottom, circled in red ink, was a number that made the room tilt. $4.7 million, Julian said quietly, give or take. That includes the house, which Daniel owned outright, not through the family. The investment accounts, the patent royalties. It's all in an irrevocable trust with you as the sole beneficiary. They can't touch it? They can't even see it. It never went through probate. It was transferred into the trust while Daniel was alive. Margaret and Trey have been fighting over an empty estate. I started to cry. Not delicate tears, ugly, gasping sobs that I'd been holding in since the funeral. Julian sat quietly, letting me cry. And when I finally looked up, he was holding a small silver key. There's one more thing, he said. The safety deposit box. Daniel said you'd know when to open it. The bank was in a strip mall in North Charleston, between a nail salon and a discount mattress store.
Not the kind of bank the Whitmores would ever set foot in. Daniel had chosen it on purpose. The safety deposit box was number 217. I inserted the key with trembling hands, turned it, and lifted the lid. Inside, there was no money, no stock certificates, no deeds. They were letters, dozens of them, each in a sealed envelope with a date on the front. One for every birthday until I turned 80. One for our would-be anniversaries. One labeled, "Open when you miss me." One labeled, "Open when you're angry." One labeled, "Open when you need to remember I chose you." On top of the stack was a single sheet of paper, handwritten in Daniel's loose, familiar scrawl. "Elena, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone, and my family did exactly what I predicted. I'm sorry. I'm sorry you had to go through it alone. I'm sorry my mother said those things. I'm sorry Trey changed the locks. I'm sorry the people who share my blood couldn't see what I saw in you the very first day. A woman who folded dollar bills into tiny squares and stayed with dying strangers because it made her feel close to her mom. The money in the trust is just money. It'll keep you comfortable. It'll pay for nursing school if you still want to finish. It'll buy you a house with a porch and a garden and a view of water. You always said you wanted water. But these letters, these are the real inheritance. I wrote one for every year I can't be there. Open them when you need me. I'll be waiting inside. One more thing. Don't let them turn you bitter. The best revenge isn't winning. It's living well. It's being happy. It's proving every single day that I was right to choose you. I love you, Elena Marchetti Whitmore. I loved you from the broken vending machine. I loved you from the 45-degree angle. I loved you from the first laugh to the last breath. Go live your life. That's all I ever wanted. Daniel. P.S. There's a letter at the bottom for Aunt Lydia. Make sure she gets it. She's the only one who deserves it. I sat on the floor of that bank vault, surrounded by envelopes, and I laughed and cried until I couldn't tell the difference anymore. The legal battle lasted 4 months. Julian Cross filed the second will with the probate court. Trey's lawyers, the Whitmore family lawyers who'd been handling the estate for generations, argued that the second will was invalid, that Daniel had been not of sound mind, that I had exerted undue influence. It all fell apart when Julian produced the trust documents. The irrevocable trust, established 3 years before Daniel's death, with assets transferred while he was demonstrably healthy and mentally competent. Witnesses, notaries, medical records, an airtight legal fortress built by a man who knew exactly what his family was capable of. Margaret called me once, after the judge dismissed the family's challenge. "You've destroyed this family," she said. Her voice was cold, but underneath it, I heard something I hadn't expected. Fear. Prescott Sr. is devastated. Trey's reputation. "Margaret," I interrupted, my voice calm in a way that surprised me. "I didn't destroy anything. You tried to steal from a dead man, your dead son, your dead stepson, and you lost. That's not destruction. That's consequences." She hung up. I never spoke to her again. Aunt Lydia got her letter. It included a small bequest, $50,000 and a collection of Daniel's favorite books, with a note that said, "For the aunt who never forgot my real mother, thank you for loving Elena when no one else would." I finished nursing school. I bought a small house on James Island, with a porch and a garden and a view of the marsh. I adopted a rescue dog, a scruffy terrier mix that Daniel would have loved. I hung a photo of us on the wall, the one from our courthouse wedding, both of us laughing, Lydia's gardenias slightly wilted in my hands. And once a year, on his birthday, I open one of his letters. It's been 3 years since Daniel died. I still miss him every single day. But I've learned something in those 3 years. Something I think he wanted me to learn all along. grief doesn't go away. You don't get over losing someone you love. But grief changes shape. At first, it's a knife, sharp, immediate, cutting into every moment. Then it becomes a heavy coat you wear everywhere. Then, slowly, without you noticing, it becomes something else. A companion, a reminder, a voice in your head that says, he would have loved this sunset. He would have laughed at this joke. He would have been proud of you for getting through today. The money was never the point. The house was never the point. Even the letters, as precious as they are, weren't the point. The point was that someone loved me enough to plan for my future even while he was losing his own. The point was that Daniel Whitmore looked at his family, all that money, all that power, all that legacy, and chose me anyway. A barista, a nursing student, a girl from a trailer park with a dead vending machine repairman for a father. He chose me. And that choice, that simple, radical, life-changing choice, is something no lawyer can undo, no family can erase, and no amount of money can ever buy. If you're listening to this and you feel alone, if you feel like no one's in your corner, like the people who should protect you are the ones hurting you, I want you to hear this. The right person will choose you. They will see you. They will plan for you. And even if they're not here anymore, that choice will echo through the rest of your life. That's my story. If it made you feel something, grief, hope, anger, or even just a little less alone, then it did what I hoped it would. Now, I have a question for you. If someone you loved left you a letter, what would you want it to say? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. If you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you here for the next one. Check the description for more stories like this.